Not since my father's funeral had I walked into that house without being invited. That should have been the sign. But I went anyway. My name is Petra Langford. I'm 32 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon at Mercy General in Boston. I've sewn shut arteries the width of a straw while someone's heart monitor flatlined. I've worked 40-hour shifts and driven home in the dark talking to myself just to stay awake. I have a good life, a quiet one I built from scratch, mostly alone. And somehow, standing on the porch of my mother's house in Raleigh, North Carolina, with my overnight bag on my shoulder and a bottle of wine I'd bought at the airport, I felt like I was 17 again and late for curfew. My sister Brooke was getting married in 2 days. I almost didn't come. Let me back up. Growing up, Brooke was everything I wasn't. She was social, easy with people, the kind of girl who got voted homecoming queen not because she campaigned for it, but because everyone just assumed she would. She married her high school boyfriend, then divorced him quietly after 3 years. Now she was marrying someone new, a man named Kent who worked in commercial real estate and had, according to my mother, a great energy. I didn't know Kent well. We'd met twice. He seemed fine. My mother had always made it clear, in the particular way that mothers do when they want deniability, that she considered my choices strange. I left North Carolina for college at 18 and never really came back. I went to UNC for undergrad, then NYU Medical School, then a residency in Pittsburgh, then a fellowship, then Boston. Every step forward felt like another step away from a family that had already decided who I was before I figured it out myself. You always had to be different, my mother used to say. Not with cruelty exactly, more like confusion. Like my ambition was a weather pattern she couldn't predict. When I got my attending position at Mercy General, I called home. My mother said, "That's wonderful, Petra. Brooke just got promoted to regional manager at the spa?" I said, "That's great, Mom." And I meant it. I did. But I also hung up the phone and sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a few minutes before I could make myself drive home. That was 2 years ago. Things hadn't changed much. The invitation to the wedding came by email. Not unusual. What was unusual was the note at the bottom added by my mother in a separate follow-up message. "We're keeping it intimate. I hope you can adjust your schedule." Adjust your schedule. As if I were the one who needed adjusting. I almost wrote back that I couldn't make it. I had a patient follow-up. I had rounds. I had a dozen real reasons. But something, stubbornness maybe, or some stubborn part of me that still wanted to belong, made me request the days off and book the flight. My colleague Dr. Ewan, who covers my cases when I travel, told me I was a masochist. She said it with a smile, which is the only reason I didn't fully agree with her. I landed in Raleigh on a Thursday evening. The rehearsal dinner was Friday night at a private event space downtown, one of those renovated industrial buildings with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place that charges $400 per head and calls it intimate. I was told dress code was cocktail attire. I showed up in a navy wrap dress and my good heels. I looked fine. I know I looked fine. What I didn't know was that my mother had not told most of Brooke's guests who I was or what I did. My mother greeted me at the door of her house Thursday night with the particular warmth she reserves for when there are witnesses. "Petra." She hugged me, patted my back twice. "You look tired." "Long flight," I said. Inside, the house smelled like the candles she's been burning since I was in middle school. Something vanilla and artificial. Brooke was at the kitchen table with 2 of her bridesmaids. She glanced up when I came in. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. "Congratulations." She smiled. It was the smile of someone doing me a favor by smiling. Her bridesmaids introduced themselves. I introduced myself. My mother, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, said nothing about what I did. She mentioned I'd come in from Boston. That was all. I went to the guest room, set down my bag, and told myself this was fine. People don't introduce each other by their jobs at every opportunity. That would be weird. But I had the quiet, specific feeling of being made invisible, not by accident. The rehearsal dinner was crowded in the way that happens when someone's guest list grew past the original plan. Round tables with white linens, candles, an open bar that the groomsmen had clearly already located. I was seated at a table near the back. Not the back of the room exactly, but far from the head table where Brooke and Kent sat with their parents and the wedding party. At my table were two of Kent's cousins from out of town, a college friend of my mother's I'd met once as a child, and a woman named something I immediately forgot because she introduced herself while looking at her phone. The place card said Petra, not Dr. Langford. Just Petra, in my mother's handwriting. I sat down. I ordered a club soda with lime from the passing server. I made conversation with Ken's cousins, who were perfectly nice and curious about Boston. And then the toast started. My mother went second, after Brooke's maid of honor. She spoke about Brooke with the ease of someone who had always found the words. She talked about Brooke's warmth, her loyalty, how she'd always been the light of the family. She talked about Kent like she'd always known he was the one. She was funny a little. She got a few laughs. She did not mention me. I was her only other child. I was sitting 20 feet away. That might have been the end of it. I could have gotten through the evening. But then Kent's uncle stood up. A large, loud man who'd had 2 bourbons and was the kind of person who treats a microphone like a dare, and started talking about Kent's incredible woman. His toast wandered. He made a joke. And then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, he pointed at our table and said something like, "And it's wonderful to see Kent's new family here, all of them." He gestured broadly. Landed on me. Even the ones we don't know much about. He was trying to be warm. It came out like something else entirely. My mother laughed. Light, easy. And then she said, just loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, "Oh, Petra keeps to herself. She's always been the one who needed to do things her own way." She paused, smiled. We're not always sure what she's up to, honestly. A few people chuckled, not cruelly. They didn't know. Brooke looked at me from the head table, and instead of stepping in, she lifted her champagne glass and said, lightly, to no one in particular, "She's always been like that. Very independent." The way she said independent made it sound like something you'd list under complications. The table near me laughed a little more. The moment moved on. I looked down at my club soda. My face was calm. I'm good at calm. Emergency medicine teaches you that. You don't have the luxury of showing your face what you're feeling when someone's life is in your hands. But my jaw was tight, and I was pressing my thumbnail into the side of my index finger, and I was counting backward from 10 in my head the way I do when I need to think before I act. I would have let it go. I want to be honest about that. I'm not someone who looks for a confrontation. I spend my days in actual emergencies. I don't need to manufacture drama. If the evening had continued from there, if we'd just eaten and clinked glasses and gone home, I would have filed the whole thing under family managing, the folder in my head where I keep everything I've learned to accept and move past. But about 40 minutes later, one of the groomsmen, well-meaning, a little drunk, leaned across the table and said, "So what do you do, Petra?" Before I could answer, my mother, who was now circulating tables, appeared behind him and put her hand on his shoulder and said, quite pleasantly, "Oh, Petra's still figuring that out." Still figuring that out. I am a board-certified trauma surgeon. I have a medical degree from NYU. I completed a 5-year residency and a 2-year fellowship. I have over 3,000 hours of surgical experience. I have been lead surgeon on cases that made it into the New England Journal of Medicine. I am 32 years old, and my mother told her daughter's wedding guests that I'm still figuring it out. The groomsman laughed awkwardly and turned back to his drink. I looked up, and Kent was looking at me. I hadn't paid much attention to Kent that evening. He was the groom, he was busy, but he'd been across the room when my mother made her comment, and I could tell from the way his expression shifted that he'd heard her. He excused himself from the head table a few minutes later, walked across the room. Not to me, he stopped to talk to his parents, then to a guest, naturally working his way through the room the way people do at their own events. He ended up near our table. He crouched down slightly next to me, not in a patronizing way, just to be at eye level, and said quietly, "I want to apologize. This seating was supposed to be different. That was a mix-up." I said, "It's fine." He said, "It's mine." He glanced toward the head table, then back at me. "I'm going to fix it." I thought he meant the seat. He didn't mean the seat. The dinner was winding down when the venue's coordinator started the final round of toasts. Ken stood up. He thanked everyone. He said the right things about Brooke. Genuinely warmly. He thanked his family and hers. And then he said, "There's one person I want to acknowledge specifically." My mother looked pleased, assuming it was her. Kent said my name. "Petra came in from Boston," he said. She works at Mercy General where she's a trauma surgeon. He paused, and the room had gone from polite half-attention to actual listening. For those who don't know what that means, and I didn't fully until Brooke told me last year, trauma surgeons are the people in the operating room when time has run out and every second matters. He looked across the room at me. I didn't know, when I first met Petra, that she'd spent years building something most people would be proud to say they'd even attempted. She did it quietly, without a lot of fanfare from anyone here. And I think that deserves to be said out loud. The room was very still. My mother had stopped smiling. Brooke was staring at her glass. Kent raised his own glass. To Petra, who shows up even when it might have been easier not to. There was a pause. One of those pauses where a room decides what to do. And then Kent's father stood up from his seat and raised his glass. Then Kent's mother. Then 3 other guests I didn't know. One by one, quietly, without fanfare. I looked at the tablecloth. I was not going to cry in my sister's rehearsal dinner. I was absolutely not going to do that. I raised my glass, nodded once at Kent, mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded back, returned to his seat. The room moved on. Dessert was served. The music came back. People started conversations again. But something had shifted. The groomsman who'd been told I was figuring it out came back to our table with a completely different energy. Kent's cousins asked me real questions. An older woman I didn't recognize leaned over from the adjacent table and said, "How long does it take to become a trauma surgeon?" I told her. We talked for 20 minutes. She had a granddaughter considering medicine. My mother did not come to my table for the rest of the evening. Brooke came to find me near the end of the night when people were gathering coats and saying their goodbyes. She looked like she'd been composing what she wanted to say for the last hour. "Kent shouldn't have done that," she said. I looked at her. "Done what exactly?" She pressed her lips together. "Made it about you. Tonight was supposed to be about us." I said, "He thanked me at his own rehearsal dinner for coming to his wedding. That's what he did." She said, "You know what I mean." I did know what she meant. She meant, you weren't supposed to be visible. She meant, I wanted you here on my terms. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and said very calmly, "Congratulations, Brooke. I hope tomorrow is everything you want it to be." And I walked out. I went to the wedding the next day. I want to explain why, because it's the question I've asked myself more than once since then. She's my sister. Whatever she said, whatever she allowed, she's still my sister, and I was still invited, and I am not someone who makes decisions in the heat of one night's anger. I went because I chose to. Not for her. For myself. Because I wanted to be able to say I showed up. Because my absence would have been made into a story about me, and I didn't want to give them that. I wore a burgundy dress and my hair up. I looked good. I knew I looked good. The ceremony was at a historic church downtown, a proper one. Stone exterior, dark wood pews, afternoon light through old glass. Beautiful, actually. I sat in the 3rd row from the back, on the bride's side. My mother was at the front. She didn't look for me. The ceremony was short and lovely. Kent cried a little when Brooke walked in. I'll give him that. He loves her. Whatever else he is, he clearly loves her. The reception was at a hotel ballroom a few blocks away. I found my place card. This time I was seated closer to the center. Kent had rearranged the seating. I ate. I drank 1 glass of wine. I danced once with one of the older uncles who insisted and was charming about it. I smiled. I was present. My mother approached me once, around 8 o'clock, while the DJ was transitioning between songs. She came up beside me and said, without preamble, "Kent told me what you do." I said, "You've always known what I do." She looked away. "I didn't know the specifics." "Yes, you did, Mom." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You could have told people yourself." And there it was. After everything. Still my fault for not performing my own credentials for her comfort. I said I shouldn't have to. And I walked to the other side of the room. I left the reception at 9:30. Not dramatically. I hugged Brooke. She was flushed and happy in the way people are when everything they planned has actually worked out. I told her she looked beautiful, because she did. She said, "You're not staying for the after party?" I said, "Early flight." She nodded. I think we both knew what the nod meant. I thanked Kent. He shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief hug instead. He said, very quietly, "Don't let them make you small." I said, "I've had some practice." He laughed, a small, real laugh. "I know," he said. I could tell. I flew back to Boston on Sunday morning. I had rounds Monday. 3 patients I'd been tracking since the previous week. A post-op consult. A staff meeting. My mother texted Tuesday, "Hope you got back okay." That was all. I didn't respond for 2 days. Not out of anger, not exactly. I just needed a little time before I could write back without saying the wrong thing. I wrote, "I did, thank you," that was all. We haven't talked about the rehearsal dinner. I don't think we will. My family has a talent for moving past things without addressing them, filing them somewhere in the shared history where they can't be examined. I used to think that was their flaw. I've come to understand it's a protection mechanism. Examining certain things would mean admitting certain things. And my mother is not ready for that. Maybe she never will be. I've made peace with that. It took a long time, and I won't pretend it doesn't still cost me something when I think about it, but I've made peace with it. What I keep coming back to is Kent. Not what he said, though, that mattered. What I keep thinking about is the choice he made. He didn't have to do it. He was 2 days from marrying into my family. He had every reason to keep his head down, stay in the good graces of his future mother-in-law, let the dinner go the way my mother intended. Instead, he looked across the room, saw someone being quietly erased, and decided for no personal benefit to name it. Gently. Without confrontation. But clearly. That's the thing I think about when I'm tired, which is often. When I come home after a shift that's gone 14 hours and I sit in my car in the parking garage for a minute before I can make myself go up. The way I've done since my first year of residency, a habit I've never broken. I think about the things that cost people something. Kent spent some of his own goodwill that night on someone he barely knew. He didn't have to do the math. He just did it. I've spent a lot of my life being around people who didn't. I don't know what broken Kent's marriage will look like. I hope it's good. I genuinely do. He seems like someone worth the work, and I know what I owe him. Not gratitude exactly, though there's that too. I owe him the understanding that the right thing is sometimes the inconvenient thing, and that knowing the difference and doing it anyway is actually fairly rare. I operate on strangers. I do it because I'm trained for it and because I chose it and because someone has to. But the reason I went to medical school in the first place, the reason I chose trauma specifically, the specialty with the worst hours and the highest stakes and the least predictability, is because I have always believed that the moment when someone needs you most is not the moment to look away. Kent understood that. Sitting at a rehearsal dinner in Raleigh, North Carolina, at a table with Edison bulbs and overpriced appetizers, a man I barely knew looked across a room and decided not to look away. I think about that a lot. I think about it every time I scrub in. A few weeks after I got back to Boston, I got a card in the mail. Physical mail, actual envelope, stamp, the whole thing. Kent and Brooke's wedding thank you card, which I assumed was mass printed. But at the bottom in Kent's handwriting, underneath the printed text, were 5 words, "Hope Boston is treating you well." That was it, nothing more. I put it on my fridge, which is not something I do with cards. I don't actually know why. It felt like something worth keeping. My colleague, Dr. Term. Ewan saw it when she came over for dinner a month later. She asked who sent it. I said, "My brother-in-law." She looked at me for a second and said, "I thought your family was complicated." I said, "It is." She looked at the card again. "Sounds like it just got a little less complicated." I thought about that for a while. She might be right. I've thought a lot about what it means to be erased by the people who are supposed to know you best. Not dramatically erased. Not the kind of thing you can point to in a single moment and say, "There, that's when it happened." It's quieter than that. It's a place card that says just Petra. It's a mother who tells a room full of strangers that her daughter is still figuring it out, and means it, and doesn't understand why that lands the way it does. It accumulates. And for a long time, I told myself that accumulation was just family, that it was normal, that I was too sensitive for expecting anything different. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you understand most things that matter, is that the people who diminish you rarely do it out of malice. My mother doesn't hate me. She loves me in whatever way she's capable of. But there is a version of love that keeps you small because it was never able to imagine you large. And that kind of love, however sincere, does real damage if you let it define what you believe about yourself. I didn't let it. That's the part I'm most proud of. Looking back, not the degree, not the hours, not the cases, but the fact that I kept going when the people closest to me couldn't see why I would. I built something real in the years when no one at home was paying attention, and I built it anyway for reasons that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. I built it because it mattered to me. Because I believed it mattered. That's the thing about integrity, and I mean that word in its original sense, the engineering sense, the sense of something that holds together under pressure. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. I spent years doing the work in rooms where no one who raised me could see me. And Kent, a man I barely knew, looked across a room and saw it in 30 seconds. That's not luck. That's cause and effect, the choices you make in private compound over time. They show up in how you carry yourself when you're tired, in how you respond when someone underestimates you, in whether you still believe in the work when no one's clapping. Ken didn't see my resume that night. He saw something in the way I sat with the diminishment without becoming it. I think about that when I'm training residents. There's always one, usually the most promising one, who crumples under criticism, who needs external validation to keep moving. And I always want to tell them the validation isn't coming on schedule. Some of it never comes. You have to build your own floor to stand on before anyone hands you a ceiling to reach for. My mother may never fully reckon with what she did that night, and I've made peace with that, not because it doesn't matter, but because waiting for someone else's reckoning as a condition of your own peace is a kind of trap. You can love people through their limitations without living inside them. And Kent. I think about him too. He didn't do what he did because it was easy. He did it because he understood something about what it costs a person to be quietly written off in a room full of people. He had the moral clarity to name it without making it ugly. That's not a small thing. That's actually quite rare. The world runs on exactly that kind of rare decency. And I have learned at 32 to recognize it when I see it, and to try, in whatever room I'm in, to be that for someone else.